Kia ora, I'm Grace, and in this video we're going to learn how to make these, the Borromean rings. Now these rings are super fun and they're a really great beginner's crochet project. Now they have a really funky name, Borromean. This comes from the symbol of the House of Borromeo, which was a historical aristocratic family from Italy. Now what's interesting about these rings is that they are three rings that are linked. They're not going to come apart. However, no two of the rings are actually connected to each other. Now what I mean by that is, if we look closely, we can see that the blue ring is fully in front of the purple ring. The purple ring is fully in front of the pink ring, and the pink ring is fully in front of the blue ring. So none of the two rings are actually connected to each other. Now this makes it a great fidget toy, as you can pull it into lots of different arrangements. We have the classic kind of coaster formation here, where it's nice and flat. We can also arrange it like a braided bracelet. And we can also form it into more of a chain shape. And you can actually change which color is in the middle of the chain. And lastly, we have the ball formation. And in this case, you'll see that instead of the rings being in front of each other, they're inside of each other. So the pink ring is inside the blue ring, the purple ring is inside the pink ring, and the blue ring is inside the purple ring. So lots of fun that you can have with the Borromean rings. Now, crocheting the Borromean rings is actually a great beginner's project. You only need to be able to do single crochet, chain stitch, and slip stitch. And to make them, all you're going to need is some yarn in 3 fun colors. You're going to need a crochet hook, scissors, and a needle. And lastly, but optionally, you can also use some stuffing. Now, I stuffed my Borromean rings to make them nice and plump, but you don't need to do this. All right, so with that, let's get on to the tutorial. The great thing about crocheting the Borromean rings is that we don't even need to count our stitches in the row or the number of rows that we're working with. We're basically going to make 3 long tubes, just like this green one. We're going to connect them into a circle and stitch them closed, and then we're going to arrange them as needed so that they make the formation of the Borromean rings. To start off with, I'm just going to chain a few stitches in a line. Now, to figure out how many chains I need is, if I look at this tube, I can see that it's about the width of my finger. So if I crochet enough chains that it can wrap around my finger, then I know I have a good number. Once I've got enough chains that they make a little circle the size I want, I'm just going to close that circle up with a slip stitch, and from there I'm going to single crochet into every stitch in the circle. Once I've done a single crochet into every stitch in the circle, I'm basically just going to single crochet into every stitch, continuing to spiral up and make my tube. Okay, so once I've crocheted all around my tube and it's as long as I want, I can do a slip stitch and finish that one off. Now, the reason I know that this is the right length is that if I loop it up into a circle, it's going to be a good size for my Borromean rings. And it's the same length as the first one I made. And I want to make sure all 3 of these tubes are of the same size. Once you finish your tube, you want to make 2 more the exact same, but in different colors. So we want them to be the same length and the same width. Once we've done that, we are going to stuff them. Now remember, stuffing them is optional. You don't need to do this, but it will give them a nice, plump, juicy feel. Now, stuffing these can be kind of tricky because they are so long and skinny. So what I like to do is use the crochet hook. I put it up into the tube and out one of the ends. I get the stuffing and I pull it into the tube that way. Once it's a little bit in, I get the other end of the crochet hook and stab it inside.
Once you've got your tube filled with the stuffing, I like to give it a bit of a wriggle, a bit of a massage, and that just helps make sure the stuffing is distributed nice and evenly along the length of the tube. Once we've done that, we're ready to close it up into a circle. To close the circle up, we are going to hold it shut so it's the place we want. I've got my needle threaded with the same colored yarn that I used for the crochet, and I basically just want to make sure it's really well stuck together. So I'm going to go in and out of every stitch, just going around the top and bottom of the tube. Once you've sewed all around the opening there, you can just cut your thread and use the tails to tie a knot and get it nice and securely shut. And then you just want to weave your ends in so that it looks really neat. Okay, so that's what you're going to do for 2 of your 3 Borromean rings. With the third one, it's a little bit complicated. You want to make sure that it's going in and out of the other ones in the correct way. Now, the easiest way to do this, I think, is to lay your first 2 rings on top of each other, and then think about how your third one's going to sit when it's a circle. From there, you just want to make sure it's always going under and over. So I can look at this purple ring and see that it's on top of the pink ring. That means the green ring needs to be on top of the purple ring and under the pink ring. From there, this end it's just gone under, so now it's going to go over this part of the purple ring. It's going to continue around. It just went over the purple, so that means it has to next go under the pink. And that'll bring it back to the end of the green. So I'm just going to sew that shut just like I did with the first 2 rings, and then we'll be done. Once you've done all of that, you will have your own wonderful, amazing Borromean rings to play with. So I hope you get a lot of enjoyment out of them, maybe give them away as a nice gift for a friend or a baby. Lots of fun that you can have with these.
What's great about this method that we use to crochet the Borromean rings is that we can actually use a really similar method to crochet lots of other objects like these. These are all examples of what we're going to call knots. However, they're not knots like we normally think of if we have a rope, tie it, some of it in a loop, and are left with 2 loose ends. These types of knots are more like if you tied a knot in whatever you were looking at, but had the ends closed up. Believe it or not, there is a whole field of study called knot theory that deals with these types of objects. A specific type of knot which not only has all the ends closed up, but uses multiple different loops is a link. So the Borromean rings are an example of a link. Now, knot theory actually gives us an infinite number of different knots and links, all with different numbers of crossings and different properties. So now there's no excuse for you to not use up your yarn stash on a bunch of fun new crochet projects. One thing that knot theorists like to look at is whether one knot is equal to a different one. This may seem kind of obvious whether one thing is the same as another, but we've already seen with the Borromean rings that they can take on lots of very different looking forms. So it's not as easy as it seems. A really important thing that knot theorists might want to figure out is whether something is actually knotted at all. In some cases, we might just be dealing with what we call the unknot, which is basically just a loop. Some unknots can be very complicated. Take a look at this extension cord tangle that I made, which basically just turned out to be a circle. So what does it mean for one knot to be the same as the other? Well, it means you can move the strands around without cutting or sticking them. If you can get from one knot to another without cutting or sticking, then you have fundamentally the same knot. Now, there are loads of ways we could try and untangle or retangle our knots, but knot theorists have broken these down into 3 simple moves, which have the epic name of the Reidemeister Moves. Each Reidemeister move just applies to a section of the knot, and they typically work best when the knot is lying flat, as that way you can more clearly see the under and over crossings. The first Reidemeister move is the untwist. The second Reidemeister move is the pull, and the third Reidemeister move is the glide. We can actually use the Reidemeister moves to untangle a complicated looking knot like this. I'm going to use the glide method to pull this over the top of that crossing. I can do a pull and just take that off of that. The last crossing here we can undo just with a twist, just twisting that section. So from all of this we can see that there are loads of knots out there and you can crochet them. We also know that it's important to figure out whether some knots are actually knotted at all, and this also applies to links. We sometimes need to know if our links are actually linked at all. With the Borromean rings, it seems so far like they're not going to come apart. They seem pretty stuck together. However, how do we know this? This also looks like it's nice and knotted and stuck together. But if you know the trick, this comes apart really easily into two unknots. This could be a bit of a problem. If I gave my Borromean rings to a baby, for example, I wouldn't want it to come apart while they were playing with it. So this leaves us with two key questions. How can we keep our Borromean rings together? And how can we figure out if they're actually linked or not? The next two videos are going to answer these two questions, so I hope you stick around to find out.